Hi everyone, I can't tell you how absolutely thrilled I am to be here today, and thank you so much for the committee to put on such an amazing conference. It's actually my first time ever in the US. As Angela said, I'm based in Dublin in Ireland, but I'm originally from Switzerland. This is my favorite mountain. And as we heard over the past 4 days, people are doing the ketogenic diet or trying the ketogenic diet for many reasons. So it could be for managing diabetes or epilepsy or for weight loss or athletic performance. But in my case, it was this guy here. It's malignant melanoma sitting in my right eyeball. And ever since I discovered or I came across research on the ketogenic diet for the first time in 2010, I've been completely hooked and just fascinated by the science. And it's amazing how things have moved really rapidly, especially sort of in the past 2 or 3 years. When I started doing it, there was really not much information. So my experience is obviously both personal, but mainly also professional as a nutritional therapist. And the bad news is it is really hard to change what we eat, as Miriam has already outlined as well. And even with the motivation as great as a cancer diagnosis, for instance. But the good news is people are doing it, and people are seeing results. And I have quite a lot of case studies. One of the most close to my heart is my youngest patient, who is now 5 years old. She was, when I first met her and her family, she was 3. She was diagnosed with a stage 4 astrocytoma type of brain tumor when she was 5 months old, and they put her through chemotherapy, and miraculously she survived. And the metastasis also, she got rid of the metastasis, but then she was stable for only a few months before they saw activity in the tumor area again. So the parents came to me. They didn't know about keto, they just knew I was working with cancer patients. And I presented her a few of the studies, and the mother immediately took it on board, implemented the ketogenic diet with, thank goodness, the support of the informal support of the oncology team. And this little girl has had stable MRIs now ever since we started. So it's nearly 2 years now. March 2015 we started. And these are stories that really keep me going, obviously, and just keep me on my toes as well. So as Angela said, in 2016, I became an author as well, a published author, along with Dominique Kemp. Dominique was actually came for a consultation to me in 2013. She has a very similar cancer history to mine. She had a malignant melanoma in her 20s, and then had breast cancer when she was about 42. And she just listened to me. We did the consultation. She did her own research, and she said, "Patricia, you can't keep this to yourself. We need to get this information out and make it more mainstream." And that's what we did in 2016. So what I want to present is sort of the gems of my lessons learned on my own keto journey, but also obviously working with clients. And I picked the 3, for me, most relevant ones. And we heard that today from Miriam said it, Beth mentioned it as well. Keep it simple at the beginning. Focus on the macros. They are initially the holy grail, but then it is very important to fine tune, and looking into nuancing the macros, and then especially also adding the micros, the phytonutrients if possible, and all of this. So the bad news is it's not just about food. It is a lot more work, and that's what I did realize, a few years in. Actually, my glucose was very stable initially, but then I realized, hang on, there's a lot of other factors that actually control my glucose and my ketones. And that's why I got very interested in lifestyle, and I'm going to talk about that today as well, and how to measure it, how to quantify it. And the good news is, there's so many devices, gadgets, tools now to help us really fine-tune our lifestyle protocols as well. And yeah, I think it almost goes without saying, but it is really tricky for us practitioners to find tools to really do the hand-holding and the support. I mean, I heard it yesterday, ideally we would get in touch with our clients or our patients every single day, but this is incredibly time-consuming, and 24/7 support is not possible. I'm a one-woman show, so that's why I didn't have any disclosures at the beginning either, so I really completely work for myself. And so it is hard to give really brilliant support to people, but there's ways around it. Just very quickly into my own story, I don't want to dwell on it, but it has a few very relevant elements. So as you saw earlier, this is my tumor on a color photography. When they really light things up, you can see it very well, the big shadow there. And I think the most fascinating thing about my tumor, and as far as I know it's pretty unique, you can actually look at it really easily. You don't need to do very expensive scans. So my consultant puts drops, you can see it's a bit of yellow there, that dilates my pupil, and you can just look into the tumor, you can look into the environment, and I think that's really unique. The unique thing about my tumor, which probably really worked in my favor as well. And that's then the inside of the eyeball. When I was diagnosed in 2008, so I was 28 at the time, the tumor was 15.2 millimeters in diameter, and pretty large. I responded really well to the plaque radiotherapy, which is sort of the one that they try first, because the radio, the strength of the radiation isn't quite as extreme as, for instance, in proton beam. So they tried that, stitched the plaque to my eye for 4 days, and removed it again. I responded really well. Tumor shrank incredibly quickly, but then I had this really out of the blue relapse. The tumor must have just taken off within a few weeks. And when my daughter was 6 months old in 2010, it was about 20 months after my initial diagnosis, my old tumor had grown even bigger than initially to 18.3 millimeters. Plus, I had managed to develop an extraocular tumor, although my biopsy had shown that there's incredibly low risk of spread, and that was a big blow, so it had spread to the outside. Treatment again, this time it was proton beam therapy. They said we just whack this thing, we take the strongest dose we possibly can, and that's what we did then in 2010. And it was sort of this recurrent pattern. 20 months later, there I was again, and I seemed to be in exactly the same situation. I had so many side effects. I had edema, I had excessive angiogenesis, I had cataract, I had radiotherapy-related retinopathy. You name it. I was sometimes called into the hospital to let students look into my eye because there was everything, because they could just see at one glance what can go wrong in an eye. So the options were Avastin, angiogenesis inhibitor, or the other option that I was presented with was okay, let's just get rid of the eye. And I was, okay, I'm going to go for my third option. My consultant was sort of, okay, he knew me really well at that stage, and he knew there was probably not much arguing with me. And he said, okay, I am going to support you, but I'm only going to give you a few weeks, and if things get completely out of control, we need to intervene very quickly. So he monitored me really closely. And these were the books coming from Switzerland. I turned to the German speaking world first. That's where I found the most practical, how to actually practically do it, and getting meal plans and recipes. So there's Ulrike Kämmerer. So I don't know if Rainer is here today. So he works with her as well. Her book is called Cancer Cells Love Sugar, Patients Need Fat. And then the other one from Dr. Johannes Koy, which was really the recipes. I had to heavily modify it because coming from Germany was quite dairy, rich in dairy, and I didn't tolerate it very well at the time due to probably radiation as well. And I also had to change quite a few things, but I kept it incredibly simple. I actually upon his recommendation, he said to limit carbs to 60 grams of net carbs a day. So I kept it really simple, 20 grams of carbs with each meal, which was a big step for me. I was a 8-meal person a day. and then also protein, I kept it pretty much to 60 grams as well. So it was really, really simple. And I also started then intermittent fasting and all those other modalities fairly soon. So as I said earlier, macros, we have to become more and more nuanced. And the first thing then I did think about was my food choices and the quality as well of food. So what I did come across very quickly, and we've heard it over and over again in this conference, I deliberately picked a paper that was from a Novartis Foundation Symposium in 2004. So they've been talking about this for a long, long time. And, insulin concentrations, they can be associated with increased risk. And now we know this is pretty certain. So I was, okay, what can I do to actually know if I have my blood glucose low because I just constantly secrete insulin, or how can I reduce this impact? And the first paper I came across then was a 1997 paper by Susan Holt and her colleagues. And it examined, I think, 39 different foods. Unfortunately, most of them were also processed foods. And they developed a little bit of a food insulin index, which was sort of helpful. It just gave me good direction into, okay, insulin response is dependent on carbohydrates, no surprise there. I think we all know that there is a correlation, but that we also have to take fiber into account because they're non-digestible carbohydrates. But then also the quantity and the quality of protein. So glucogenic amino acids were mentioned earlier by Beth, and that's where I got really interested. So what's that all about? And the fat in the case of a ketogenic diet is probably not quite as significant. It's more when you eat fat in combination with quite high carbs as well. The fat, as Beth demonstrated as well, it actually slows the gastric emptying, and also the glucose doesn't spike as quickly, but it comes at a cost of insulin. So insulin secretion goes up. But in my case, because my carbs were reduced, I didn't find that too significant, but it is interesting. So then in 2014, Kirsten Bell published her thesis. She's based in Sydney, and then the paper based on her thesis was published in 2016. It is more with a view to insulin dosing for type 1 diabetics and food choices for type 2 diabetics. So it's not necessarily with a view to low carb or keto, but it was a lot more expanded information compared to the 1997 paper, and I started to really learn about the different types of foods and how they affect insulin. And then also Marty Kendall, I don't know how many people know him, he's based in Australia. His website, optimizingnutrition.com, is a brilliant resource, and he did a lot more work with Ted Naiman, actually, who again is really good resource for anything to do with insulin. So they looked at the different colorations, and that's where I first came across then the formula of insulin load. And I think it really demonstrates nicely how we can sort of condense or just view the insulin load. So it's the total carbohydrates, and then we deduct the fiber because they don't seem to have as much of an impact on glucose, and then insulin. And then I think this is really significant that about half of the protein we eat requires insulin as well. And if we, change this around and want to know what proportion of our energy in a particular food actually requires insulin to metabolize, that's when this formula then can be used. So, to sum it up, Marty, very nicely says, understanding fiber, protein, and also fructose, which again, in the case of keto, is not quite as relevant, is useful to predict glucose, and then obviously also insulin response. So how can we use this data? That's always the question. How can I use this now in terms of translating it into eating? And so there's his website there, Optimizing Nutrition. Marty Kendall, he did analyze a lot of foods. And the most obvious ones, sort of the least insulinogenic ones, no surprise, they're olives that are high in fat, pretty low in carb, and pretty low in protein, and cream, pecans, macadamia nuts, sesame seeds. So this list goes on and on. You can go and have a look yourself. And then also the most insulinogenic foods, not much of a surprise, they are the very high carb foods. But I think that, that's fair enough. But let's look at all the in-between foods, especially when people ask, so Patricia, what do you think about dairy? And obviously you can look at dairy from tons of different perspectives. But when we look at it from insulin, okay, do you talk about full-fat Greek yogurt or cream, as we saw earlier, butter? Or are you talking about non-fat yogurts, so insulin-generating yogurts, basically? So there's a huge, really range there, and I think it can be very useful to show this to patients. And then also, for instance, when it comes to fish, you can make just across the board, eating mackerel, halibut, herring, salmon, sardines, anchovies, not just from an insulinogenic perspective, also from a fatty acid profile perspective. They are, I think superior, in my opinion, to, for instance, all the whitefish that are lean protein and that tend to spike your insulin a lot more. So the same, for instance, with all the duck, the poultry. So duck is less insulinogenic than, for instance, turkey and chicken breast. So I think that can be useful, especially if somebody struggles going into ketosis. And then the next step is really focusing on nutrient density. And I mean, at the beginning, I quite often use a multi. When people are going into ketosis, they're probably because they're so confused, they're eating the same stuff over and over again. There's not much variety. And so that's when I use a multi, but in the long term, I'm actually quite reluctant to use multivitamins, just simply because I think nutrient overloads are equally detrimental than nutrient deficiencies. So yeah, the constant question that I get, but Patricia, aren't we lacking nutrients if we exclude whole food groups? And it is an interesting question, and I was sort of, okay, let's just get to the bottom of this. So what I did was I'm using a software called Nutritics for meal planning and evaluating recipes. So I created this meal plan, which was pretty much what I was recommended to do when I was in the hospital. When I asked, what do I eat? You get the food pyramid. And this is what you do. So for breakfast, you have, for instance, porridge and 2 teaspoons of honey, banana, orange juice. That's what I used to eat, and I thought I was doing a brilliant job. Snack, 2 slices of wholemeal bread with margarine and jam. Lunch, a sandwich, brown bread, not white bread, brown bread. Tomato relish, a bit of sliced tomato, iceberg lettuce, and 3 thin slices of ham. And then snack in the afternoon would be a honey and oat bar, for instance, low-fat yogurt. And for dinner, I picked for this particular evaluation a tomato soup, chicken breast fried in sunflower oil with onions, broccoli, and 3 potatoes. So it's actually pretty much reflective of what most Irish people eat. And so we see then this is about, 2,000 calories in total, and this is sort of a very typical macronutrient ratio on a standard Western diet. And then if we go into a ketogenic diet, so for breakfast, it could be very common would be, for instance, avocado, and then a bit of cheese, Gruyere, for instance, spinach, and then scramble that in eggs. Lunch, very typical, could be sardine salad with Brazil nuts, sunflower seeds, and then garnished with soaked seaweed, so lots of green leafy vegetables as well. And then for dinner, in this case here, I picked liver cakes, the ones that are in our book that most people actually really like. The feedback has been great. Red peppers and broccoli with tahini dressing, and then even a dessert, homemade dark chocolate. And I deliberately wrote here well planned, because I did realize then when I went through sort of the standard nutrients that most dietitians look at as well, you do have to plan it well, and you can't just eat anything and then expect the nutrients to be as high as on a standard Western diet where we use a lot of enriched foods. Now we can debate how well are we going to absorb those synthetic nutrients that are in bread, for instance, or also milk. So this is debatable, what we can actually absorb. But when we just look at it from that perspective, we need to plan a ketogenic diet pretty well to get our nutrients. But it's totally doable. And as I said earlier, variety is really, really important. And some people sort of get really stuck in a sort of their comfort zone, their regime. This is what they have 2 breakfasts, 2 lunches and 2 dinners, and they rotate them, and I think this is, in the long term, is probably not wise. So also, spices and herbs have been mentioned. I think they're hugely underestimated. They have so many nutrients and also phytochemicals that we probably don't get in a lot of other foods. So compared to fruit and vegetables, there is a lot in herbs and spices, and they perfectly complement a ketogenic diet. And then tracking nutrients. Again, there's so many different nutrient density indices out there. It's very confusing, and they all have their limitations. So if you do look into them, just really research them. So there's Joel Fuhrman's Andy food scores that also take into account ORAC, so the antioxidants, and the issue I have with his food score is that they only take into account fruit and vegetables, so the very nutrient-dense, protein-rich foods are not included. And then we have the opposite extreme, Matt Lalonde, who did a more focused sort of nutrient index for more paleo food, so protein and fat, and again, that's a bit limiting as well, because we can't go overboard on protein on the ketogenic diet. And then we also have, for instance, the nutrient-rich foods index that I analyzed. This paper came out, and I realized then that they limit saturated fat to 20 grams a day on a 2,000 calorie diet, and otherwise all foods that are above 20 grams, they're excluded. Doesn't make much sense on a ketogenic diet to look at foods from that perspective. So again, Marty Kendall comes to the rescue, brilliant engineering brain, really great at data analysis. And what he did, he looked at the 43 essential nutrients, so the 43 nutrients we can't produce ourselves, and looked at the ones that are the nutrients that are really easily obtainable for most people, and ended up with only 27 nutrients that are the most challenging to get in diet. And he narrowed it down, and he's got this brilliant interactive chart on his website where you can actually click on there's the percentage of insulinogenic calories. So you can click on one of those foods, and at the bottom then you see the nutrient density. And how he classified it was 0 is average nutrient density, and then 2, for instance, is then 2 standard deviations above the mean. So, a lot more nutrient dense than sort of the average food. So this is, in my view, at the moment, is one of the better nutrient density indices. So my experience, again, a quick recap. So focus on the macros, make it as easy as possible initially, and then move on to the more nuanced views, and especially nutrient density. And what I do then as well, once we really have the hang of it, I quite often like to use functional testing. So this is an organic acid test, or Nutraval is another one that can be used, but I like the Great Plains organic acid test, for instance, and it shows, where the chronically problematic nutrients, could be. So actually in my case as well, and in a lot of tests that I did, CoQ10, carnitine and B vitamins are, they seem to be the most problematic ones, and you probably see they're the ones that are really important for getting fatty acids into the cell, and then also, getting the Krebs cycle going. When we talk about measuring and testing, a lot of people also ask, so when do you measure what in terms of the ketone bodies? And as we saw earlier, there's the urine, and we've moved on to, most people do the blood now, but there's also acetone in breath that we can measure. So just very quickly, so beta-hydroxybutyrate is, I consider it sort of based on my experience, and I'm going to show you afterwards how we do that. It's like a buffer or a reserve. Acetone reflects the actual metabolic usage of ketones, and acetoacetate is more sort of the interim spillage, so what we basically get rid of and that is not being utilized. So monitoring acetoacetate is done in urine, so I think that's what is the most sort of the oldest way of measuring, what they used to use at the beginning. And it's very useful when somebody starts up. So the first 2 weeks, I say, okay, use your keto sticks to make sure you're actually producing ketones. So that's what we want to know, is somebody starting to produce ketones. But again, after about 2 or 3 weeks, when people are starting to actually utilize their ketones for energy production, we don't actually want acetoacetate to be really high, because what's the point if we just pee the ketones out? We would actually like to use them and be efficient with them. So beta-hydroxybutyrate then measured in blood, it's the gold standard, and in my experience, they tend to be lower in the morning than in the evening, and because they are so expensive to buy, the ketone strips now, actually I think they've trebled in price since I started. Don't know why, supply and demand. So yeah, they tend to be higher in the evening, so it's good to know for practitioners when they guide their clients or patients when timing-wise they should look at them. And then, Tom Seyfried's glucose ketone ratio is obviously what I talked about with my clients as well. And we ideally wanted 1 or below the metabolic zone, but I have to say it can be incredibly challenging for people to go that low, and especially when they're just starting, it can take some time to get there. But I've had various clients who are consistently between 1 or even below 1 and 2. And then monitoring acetone is done in the breath, and you've probably seen the Ketonix is one of the examples. There's some other devices as well, but that's the one I'm using as well. So you blow into this device, and in my view, it can be potentially useful in the long term when you've actually established some patterns, and I'm going to talk about them. So it's really what I'm using quite a bit myself as well, and this is what it looks like. So these are observations. These are not sort of randomized controlled trials, peer-reviewed studies. These are observations I've made with Alex Ferretti. I really invite you to suss out his website as well. Brilliant practitioner. He's based in the UK, and he mainly focuses on athletic performance, but I actually learned quite a lot from the guys who focus on athletic performance. So what we do, or so far what we have, potential patterns, what we've observed is, okay, both are low, beta-hydroxybutyrate is low, acetone is low, so chances are this patient is not in full ketosis, and then we need to check, we need to look into macronutrient ratios as first port of call, but then also is there a pronounced or an extensive sort of prolonged insulin response. So actually, insulin and beta-hydroxybutyrate are usually negatively correlated. They're like antagonists. And so looking into that. And also, there's things like age, advanced disease can make it much harder to get into ketosis. And There's things to consider like cofactors. So again, nutrients. Do we have the nutrients to actually make this work? And for instance, also single nuclear polymorphisms, so SNPs. What's going on there? Could that prevent somebody from going into ketosis? And then if beta-hydroxybutyrate is high and acetone is low, that could indicate that there is a poor conversion. So we need to convert beta-hydroxybutyrate into the energy production system so that it can actually be burned. So is this happening, and why is it not happening? And I see this quite a bit. Somebody is in good ketosis, but for some reason they're not quite getting there with the acetone. So that's when I am looking into various different reasons why this could be happening. And again, there are different things that I look into, and that's when I'm also really keeping in or asking patients to really keep a close eye on glucose, just to make sure they're not both going up and we have any risk of acidosis, especially with kids. That can be sort of a bit, of a risk, obviously, initially. And it can take a while, actually, for both of them to come up. That's what I've observed. And that somebody is really having good beta-hydroxybutyrate, but their acetone is lagging. But again, these are observations, and I'd love if other practitioners were looking into these patterns. That would be great. And if beta-hydroxybutyrate is low and acetone is high, interestingly, this is happening quite a bit to me because I've started exercising quite a bit more again. I used to be a triathlete and I did international competitions, and I had to obviously put it all on hold when I was not well, but I'm sort of starting to build up again. And it looks like I'm really incredibly well fat adapted, so I think we have to make a differentiation as well between being in ketosis and being fat adapted, where your body really goes for fat as the preferred fuel. And this is what seems to be happening to me, that I am really utilizing my ketones, and my body seems to know what to do with glucose. And so my beta-hydroxybutyrate is not always as high as it used to be. And again, it could be also, sometimes when calorie intake isn't enough, then you're obviously using your own storage as well, and then the long term. If you're not, the storage is when you're accessing your own stored fat instead of eating it. And this is just an overview. Actually, Alex did this to show how exactly visually that happens. So we see at the bottom left there the start of ketosis, where acetone and beta-hydroxybutyrate are low, and say we go up the axis there into high conversion. That's pretty much where I am quite a bit as well. It depends a little bit, but we want, obviously, people ideally, especially when they are doing it for therapeutic reasons, up there in high ketosis, and checking both acetone and beta-hydroxybutyrate. And then the low conversion needs to definitely be explored as well if somebody doesn't seem to get the ketones into energy production system. So it could be handy, for instance, to do also an organic acid test. Is there any mitochondrial damage? What is going on? And again, we need more data. So what I did emphasize as well, it's not just about food, and I think this picture really it sort of reflects my patients when I talk to them. Oh no, now I've finally got the hang, and now she's coming with something else. It seems like really, really hard work. And so what I have found is that there are certain major lifestyle factors that can have such an impact on glucose that it's really worth talking to your clients or patients about it, or as a cancer patient to really take it into account. So physical activity, again, I like Kerry Cornea's work. He's based in Canada, and he really looks into all the aspects of exercise for cancer patients. I met him at a conference in Germany a few years ago, and I follow his research. And when it comes to cardio, again, there's the whole question of the Cori cycle. What do we do with lactic acid when it gets reconverted into glucose? So we do, if somebody is really in pretty acute phase of cancer, I don't tell them to go and do high intensity interval training. So, medium intensity, doing some, brisk walking, and then also resistance training under supervision, especially if somebody has bone metastasis or any other cancer that could really severely have an impact on exercise. Really do it under supervision. And what I quite often say to people as well, it's probably more about moving more and in the really acute phases, exercise, sort of formal exercise. That's what I did as well. I really put it on the back burner a little bit for a while. Life load stress, don't publish a book. That was me last year. It can have such a huge impact, and you always hear about it, but when you actually start to really measure it and see how it impacts your glucose and your ketones, you do have quite an aha moment. So there are various tests you can do. So there's the dry urine test for comprehensive hormones. These tests are great. There's Genova that do the adrenal adrenal profile, for instance, as well. The question is, this is a point in time. It's a snapshot. And for me, if somebody starts measuring their heart rate variability, and again, that comes from the athletic world, it gives a really good indication of your trend of how well you can switch between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. And if somebody does that on a consistent basis, you start to see really nice patterns. And it's an app that you can download, a HRV app. It's not expensive at all. And stress reduction, I talk a lot about that to my clients, and I was really grateful yesterday. Tom Seyfried, he mentioned in his talk as well that the emotional and the psychological component really cannot be underestimated, and you have to gauge at what stage a patient is and how well they will be able to make big changes to their lifestyle. And so sometimes it can be as simple as, using proper sort of breathing techniques. So Buteyko has done some really good research also into cancer patients, how we can optimize our breathing to get more oxygen into the cells. So I think this is really fascinating as well to look into all this. Sleep hygiene, huge. So the WHO actually classified circadian disruptions, so for instance shift work, as a probable carcinogen. So this is really significant. So what I've also seen is it has potentially huge impacts on glucose levels, especially fasting glucose as well. So when when people are making chronic sleep mistakes, and this is the reason why I wear this Oura ring. So it's basically a device that measures my sleep. I can switch it off overnight, so I can put it on flight mode so that it doesn't have any EMF. And it measures my deep sleep, my REM, and also my light sleep. And it's a really good indication of stress as well. I got 1 minute of deep sleep last night. So it's funny, I didn't feel overly nervous before the talk, but my body certainly does in some way, or my subconscious is sort of, there's something coming up tomorrow. It really totally killed my deep sleep. Circadian disruption, what I said, WHO. So it's not just about quantity. Some people say, I went to bed then, and then I woke up at a certain time, and I got my 8 hours, I'm still knackered. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if you're in bed and you're asleep, that it means that you're getting the quality as well. And that's what, for instance, the Oura Ring is measuring. And it's fascinating. So for instance, the timing of my last meal has an impact on on my deep sleep. So if I eat too late, again, it reduces my amount of deep sleep, and we know that's when we restore, that's when also in terms of melatonin production, that's what we all optimize if we do go into a nice sleep cycle and having deep and REM sleep. And from that perspective, it's really, it's brilliant. And also light exposure. So when I expose myself to bright lights outdoors in the morning, first thing in the morning, and then in the evening reduce the blue light exposure. So at home I've got my blue blockers. That has an impact as well. So it's fascinating to see, okay, if I do this, what happens and how can I optimize this all? And it's all by just wearing this. So it's not a lot of work, especially for practitioners. They can just evaluate the data. All patients have to do is wear this, and they get recommendations then. So a huge thing is compliance and accountability. And I loved Beth, how she said, cheating, it's experimenting. And I think we have to put a positive slant on things for patients as well, and not make them feel guilty, but obviously show them the importance of being compliant. So it's hard to get this balance. So this is what a lot of people do look like when they start a ketogenic diet. And I once had this elderly lady, and she was so keen to do the ketogenic diet, but one morning she called me and she said, Patricia, I woke up in the middle of the night and then I couldn't go back to sleep because I was so worried what I would have for breakfast. And then it came to my mind that I would have to have lunch as well, and then dinner. And then the poor thing, it was really, she was so, and I thought, okay, let's just put this on hold and talk about it and just take very, very small steps. And she was clearly totally overwhelmed. And some people actually say, I just don't eat at all because I'm too scared. So fasting is great, but yeah, it can be pushed to the limits. And that's why you probably all came across at this stage, Paul and Nikki are out there presenting Senza, and so I started working with them a couple of months, 2-3 months ago, and I have high hopes that this will make a really big impact on how I work with my clients, because I can. It's a website and app combo, so my clients have the app, and I see in the background, it's big sister watching you, what is going on, and I can have my coaching platform, and I can then keep track of client progress and how they are. I don't really like the word compliant, but how they're following and what the biggest issues are, why they can't be sort of on track. And what I can do as well is I can get in touch with them every day via videos, recipes, and tips, and just put a very clear structure on their process of implementing the diet. And also with a view then to building community. So I'd love it if people see, oh, actually, there's some other people in my area, and they can actually meet in person. It's like coming here for me. I had so many virtual friends, and now they're all real. It's great. So I think it can be very useful for this as well, because I think it's huge if we have to support, and we know other people are doing this, and you can share experiences and pitfalls, and you can drag each other out of a hole, then that's really brilliant. And then this is what it looks like. Then inside, it's not just tracking, it's really also mentoring and information, and it's time-based. People can also track their glucose and ketones, and we're going to incorporate the Oura Ring. So you're probably wondering now where I am at in terms of my own health, and how, what was the impact of my approach to the ketogenic diet. So when I started, then I went back a few weeks later, and my consultant looked in the eye and he said, Patricia, did you get a Avastin injection somewhere else? And he said angiogenesis was way reduced, edemas were gone, cataracts have really reduced, and it was just, he said, it's the calm after a big storm. It was amazing, he could see that. And my extraocular tumor is completely gone. It survived. It actually managed to survive really, really strong proton beams, but it didn't survive keto. So, So I'm on my toes. I know why. I have constantly clients who say, I was in remission for 8 years, I've got a relapse, so I'm always reminded of that, not to get complacent. Regular checkups, liver ultrasound, kidneys ultrasounds, because the liver is at danger of metastasis. Fatty acid profile, and I know Andrew is going to talk about this in the afternoon. I did heavy metal chelation. I was full of mercury, aluminium, lead, you name it. Organic acid test. I'm looking into repurposed drugs with the Care Oncology Clinic in the UK, and they're doing brilliant work as well. So I am looking into the option. I'm still very reluctant because I'm not doing well on drugs, but I'm researching it. And this is it's just constant climbing and learning and being challenged, yeah. And so again, the lessons learned, very quick, and then the challenges ahead, clinical trials, and as lots of practitioners and scientists said, we need to really pool the data because there's so many people working on this now, practitioners, and to get together to learn from each other and really drive this movement. Dealing with resistance, it's a big one for me in Ireland. Creating a safe environment for people is absolutely crucial, and doing the hand-holding and the support, and make sure they have all this network. So that's it for me. Thank you so much.